Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session 1 of part 4. Part 4 covers allegations and has been divided into 2 sections. Section 1 covers allegations that meet the harm threshold, and section 2 covers allegations that do not meet the harm threshold and are now called low-level concerns. In session 1, we will cover section 1 of part 4, and in session 2 we will cover section 2. So allegations that meet the harm threshold is when any child under the age of 18, an adult has posed some form of risk of harm to that child. The adult can be a teacher, any member of staff of the school, supply teacher, volunteers, or contractors. And where it meets the harm threshold is where they've behaved in a way that has harmed a child or may have harmed a child, possibly committed a criminal offence against a child or related to a child, behaved towards a child or children in a way that indicates he or she may pose a risk of harm to children, or behaved or may have behaved in a way that indicates they may not be suitable to work with children. Now, this is known as transferable risk. The last bullet point, which I said is known as transferable risk, this includes any behavior that may have happened outside school. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on school site or within school premises. It can be any behavior that has taken place outside school that indicates that an individual may be unsuitable to work with children.
I think there's 2 points here, Khadija. If we just move back a slide, and that is that we've highlighted on the slide deck words that we feel you need to pay particular attention to, and that isn't always done in the guidance document. So here we've highlighted the words may pose, and in the second bullet point we've got may not, and that tells us that there doesn't have to be certainty that this has happened. And so if you have any indication that someone, whether it's a member of your staff or whether it's someone who's not but has had contact with a child in your school, has in a way behaved in a manner that could give you cause for concern, then that falls under allegations that may meet the harm threshold. So it's really important that you are absolutely clear about that, and that members of staff in your school are clear about that. And this final point that we have here on the slide, it again is particularly important because it's about behaviour that's occurred in a way that just gives you concern that this person should not be working with children. And it doesn't have to be anything in particular, but it just gives you concern. And that, as Khadija has said there, refers to transferable risk. Thank you, Khadija.
So paragraph 342 to 350 in part 4 covers the initial response to an allegation. So it's been expanded to make it clear that when an allegation is made, what kind of support needs to be provided to the child. Also, whilst the investigation is continuing, what kind of support the person subject to the allegation is provided as well.
And that, I think that's really important as well, isn't it, Khadija? That yeah. What we've got here in these paragraphs is that the DFP have made it clear, expanded the information, so given it greater depth, that when there is an allegation made against a pupil or made against a member of staff by a pupil, then the welfare of that child or children must be your priority. So that's something that staff need to be made aware of, and senior leaders need to be clear about that. And actually, I'm very aware that in a number of schools, allegations have been made against members of staff. And what procedures did school follow? And one of those procedures now needs to give attention to children and their welfare. So having a conversation with them just as you would do on any other scale if there was a concern, to ask about how they're feeling, and is there anything that they want to bring to your attention? Are they happy to go back to class? And so on and so on. Just the same sorts of questions that you would be asking children if they were feeling upset or feeling down about a particular issue. How would you deal with that child? So it's thinking about the welfare of the child. And secondly, the bullet point raises particular attention to the person who is being investigated also requires support from you as a school. And that's something that we will be coming on to a little bit more later on.
So where the school identifies a child that has been harmed or may be at immediate risk of harm, or you need to consider that if there is an emergency, then in that case, instead of informing the head teacher about your concern, you would contact the police immediately, because if it's an emergency and that child is at immediate risk of harm and there's no time to waste, then in that case you would contact the police. Otherwise, your concern would go to the head teacher, unless the allegation was, your concern was about the head teacher, then it would go to the chair of governors or the proprietor.
And I think, Khadija, that's something just to reinforce again, that allegations made against a member of staff must be taken to the head. And I think that is something that sometimes members of staff are not clear about. And often the response would be, well, we would take it to a DSL or a deputy DSL. So staff must be absolutely clear that allegations made against a member of staff must go immediately to the head. And as you said quite rightly, if the allegation is against the head, it would need to go to the chair. So really colleagues, be very clear about that you are absolutely aware of the processes that need to be followed and who you need to speak to if an allegation has been made. And as I've said to you, and it goes back to what Khadija said in one of our first videos, that we have this impression that this wouldn't happen here. This doesn't happen here. A member of staff in the school is not going to have an allegation made against them, because I know these members of staff. I could, but I won't, of course, name you a number of schools where that has happened recently. So you absolutely need to be clear about your procedures, what it is that you need to be doing, and ensuring that you are closely following the guidance that's been given to us in keeping children safe.
Yeah, so the two main aspects to consider when an allegation is made is the welfare of the child, like I just previously mentioned. The DSL would be responsible for ensuring that the child is not at any further risks, and if a referral to children's social care needs to be made, then the DSL would be responsible for that. The second aspect that needs to be considered is, like I mentioned, that support should be in place for the person who's subject to an allegation. So the case manager who would deal with the allegation and liaise regularly with the LADO would put in place somebody who the person who's subject to an allegation would turn to for any support, and that person would be a dedicated person, named a dedicated person for the person subject to an allegation to turn to for any kind of support or any discussions or questions they may have.
Just to mention as well, Khadija, that the case manager normally, they call it the case manager in the guidance document, but in most cases that would be the head. So the head teacher would be taking that role and would be discussing with the LADO exactly what has happened, and as it says there clearly, what needs to happen next. So again, it's really important that you are taking that advice, following that advice, recording that advice, so that you are able to demonstrate exactly what it is that you've done and when you've done it and at what times you've done it. So it's really clear, but that comes from the LADO, and their advice needs to be clearly adhered to.
It is really, really important that you liaise with the LADO and you follow the guidance that they provide, because at no point you do not want to, if it becomes a police investigation, you do not want to jeopardize any investigation or any queries or assessments that they may need to do. So when dealing with an allegation, schools are expected to apply common sense and judgment, deal with the allegation quickly, fairly, and consistently. So again, it's quite clear there that it has to be dealt with quickly and fairly and consistently. Do not waste time. Provide effective protection for the child and support the person subject to the allegation. So that's quite clear as well.
I think that when you mentioned there, Khadija, about working quickly, that's something again that has been a cause for concern in some schools, because this is safeguarding, and safeguarding requires you to ensure that you are working quickly and effectively to ensure that children are protected. And so if you are not working quickly, not talking to the LADO, not ensuring that the child is protected, or considering the welfare of that child, then you effectively have failed to safeguard that particular pupil or pupils. So this is something that you must be particularly careful about, that there isn't a delayed response, that you make sure that everything else stops whilst you go ahead and manage the allegation and everything that is required of you, as the guidance clearly states.
And I think in this slide here, I think what you need to be aware of is that the child who's made the allegation, so the parents, the child involved, and the person who's subject to an allegation, they understand what the local authority arrangements are and how you're going to manage the allegation, including the contact details of the LADO. So the person subject to an allegation should know who the LADO is and the contact details, because they should be made to feel that they can discuss things if they need to, but their main point of contact would be the person that's being put in place at school for their support.
Just a question to you. We've shared with our listeners that it's important that schools are very clear about local authority arrangements. Is that something that they would automatically receive information about from the LAs? Would DSRs be expecting that information to come through to them, or would you advise schools to contact their local authority and ask them for clear guidance on what to do if there is an allegation in their school?
I think it really varies from local authority to, it varies local authority to local authority. Some local authorities are very good and, they will provide the DSLs all the information and guidelines, and some local authorities don't. So I would advise that all schools just make sure that they have, the expectations and procedures and guidelines from your local authority about allegations, etc. So I would advise schools to make contact if they haven't received that kind of information, to make contact and get that information.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Right. So before contacting the LADO, you need to make sure that you've got the basic facts, you've established the story, you've made sure everything, you've got all the information that you have, because at the end of the day, once that allegation is referred to the LADO, they will either do statutory assessments or they will contact the police, and it will become a police investigation. And you don't want to jeopardize anything, any investigation and assessment. And therefore, it's very, very important that you have the facts and, all the information you've got is correct to the best of your knowledge. So you need to, first of all, determine, because an allegation can be made, but, if you haven't determined the facts, what if after you've passed it on to LADO, it comes about that member of staff wasn't on site in the first instance anyway. So you need to make sure all the facts are established before you contact the LADO. So was the individual in the school at the time of the allegation? These are just some examples. Did the individual or could they have come into contact with the child? Was there any possibility of them having contact with that child? Were there any witnesses? Do you have any CCTV footage? So these are just some ideas that you should determine before contacting LADO. So get as much information as possible. So again, local procedures, you need to ensure you are aware of exactly what kind of information your LADO will require in order to process that investigation further. Again, informing the person who's subject to an allegation, you need to consider that very carefully on when you're going to inform them. This is done on a case-by-case basis, and you should always get guidance from your LADO or children's social care and the police where appropriate on when to let those persons subject to an allegation, let them know that there has been an allegation made against them. So again, you would deal with this. There's no, there's no basic guidelines on this. You need to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. So in one case, you might let the person subject to an allegation know immediately that there's been an allegation made against them. In another case, the LADO may say to you, well, no, we want you to wait until we give you the go-ahead to discuss that with the person subject to an allegation. So you need to deal with it on a case-by-case basis, but you need to get guidance from the LADO and not just use your own initiative. Always discuss it with the LADO.
And again, I think, well, as we mentioned already, Khadija, it's important that schools where this may happen are logging the detail of their investigation. So people that they speak to, when they speak to them, the responses that they're getting and the action that they're taking as a result of that. That's so important.
Yeah, that is very, very important, because a lot of times staff from schools, they are told something from the local authority, but they don't record it. They don't date and time it. They don't record who they've spoken to. And then there has been times when it's taken back to the local authority says, well, no, we've got no record of that discussion happening. So it's really, really important you date, you time, and you make note of the person and their role of who you've spoken to and when. Like Hasina said, that is really, really important because that's your evidence base. Okay, so where the case manager is concerned about the welfare of other children in the community or members of the family of the person who's subject to an allegation, they should discuss this concern with the DSL. And then the DSL will make a risk assessment of the situation. And if necessary, the DSL will do a referral to children's social care about particular children in the community or children of that individual's family. Okay, so where it is clear that an investigation by the police or children's social care is not necessary, or the strategy discussion or initial assessment decides that the case, that is the case. So if a referral is made to LADO and then it comes back, police investigation says there's no further action required. In those cases, the LADO will discuss the next steps with the case manager. So the LADO will always guide you on what to do next. So if you make a referral to the LADO, it goes on to a police investigation or it goes on to a referral to children's social care, but then it comes back and they say, well, you know what, no, we're not going to take it any further. You will then liaise with the LADO and wait for the LADO to tell you what to do next, what your next steps will be and what actions to take next. Where the initial discussion leads to no further action, the case manager and the LADO should record the decision and justification for it. So again, it's making a record of what the outcome was, why no further action was taken, and agree on what information should be put in writing to the individual concerned and by who. So then it's between the case manager and the LADO. They should agree on exactly what information they're going to share with the person that was subject to the allegation, and who's going to put that in writing to them. Like Hasina said, a case manager will either be a head teacher or the principal, and where the head teacher is the subject of an allegation, and the case manager will be the chair of governors or the chair of the management committee in independent schools. And in the independent school, it will be the proprietor. So if the head teacher is subject to an allegation, then it will be the proprietor that will be the case manager. Otherwise, in all other cases, the case manager will be the head teacher or principal. Okay, suspension. So where an allegation meets the harm threshold, a lot of schools are under the impression that they should immediately suspend the person that's subject to an allegation. That should not be an automatic response when an allegation is reported. You should try and avoid suspension before taking any other step. You should consider all other options before thinking about a suspension. Suspension should be the last resort where there's no option. The case manager must consider carefully whether the circumstances warrant suspension from contact with children at school or until the allegation is resolved. It should be considered only in cases where there is a cause to suspect a child or other children at the school are at risk of harm, or the case is so serious that it might lead to grounds for dismissal. So only in very, very serious cases, you should consider suspension. Otherwise, you should think of alternatives where you can protect the child and children in school, but also provide that support to the person that's subjected to an allegation.